The secret to health is actually in the relationship you have to yourself and your body, your environment, and those around you, and being able to take in information and act on that information and actually adapt to different demands. So whether it be environmental demands, whether it be work demands, relationship demands, or even physiological demands, like things like, for example, like bodies break down. How are you going to adapt to those breakdowns? Does your body have enough resources to bounce back? Do you have the capacity to change your behavior to optimize the chances of your body staying strong and healthy?
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Casey Means, co-founder and chief medical officer of Levels. I am so excited about our guest today. It is Dr. Molly Maloof, and she is a Levels advisor. And she is just has innovation oozing out of, every cell in her body. She's so incredible. What you need to know about Dr. Molly is that she was actually one of the first people really ever, this is like years ago, to understand and spread the message of continuous biofeedback for health optimization with continuous glucose monitoring. So she is really the OG in this topic, and we have her to really thank for bringing this into the forefront of sort of the conversation. And she does so many different things. So she is an author, she's a physician, she's a lecturer at Stanford, she is a content creator and writer. And in all of this, she focuses on the science and tools to extend health span, achieve health optimization, and scale personalized medicine. She has an amazing course at Stanford that she created called Live Better Longer, Extending Health Span to Lengthen Lifespan, which I seriously wish I'd had 10 years ago when I was at Stanford. And this class is super popular. It exposes students to evidence-based holistic tools for living the longest and healthiest life possible. And so cool to think how planting those seeds will totally probably change their trajectory if they go into medicine, which is amazing. She's been a consultant and advisor to over 50 companies in the digital health, consumer health, and biotech industries. She's the spokesperson of Qualia Skin by Neurohacker. We're going to talk about skin later in the episode, so stay tuned. And she's currently writing an amazing book with Harper Wave on female biohacking, and is the founder of Adamo Biosciences, which aims to radically improve health by optimizing the love we can experience in our lives. So we have so much to talk about. Welcome to a whole new level, Molly.
Thank you so much, Casey. It's such a pleasure to be here. And what a beautiful introduction. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, of course. I appreciate you. And I want to jump in, totally not talking about metabolic health, but you literally just arrived back stateside from an amazing trip to Antarctica. So I would love for you to tell us just a little bit about your trip to Antarctica, and what did you learn about yourself, and maybe like what new things you learned about the earth during this trip?
Yeah. I mean, whoa. Can I just tell you that there's something that happens when you get to a continent that you have only seen photos of, and you realize that this is both the most beautiful experience you've had in your entire life, but it's also the most paradoxically terrifying because you're watching nature melt in front of you. And literally, like when I was there was like this massive ice shelf collapse. And I didn't see the ice shelf collapse. We would do some calving episodes of Antarctica ice, but essentially the hottest day recorded was when I was there. And there was a part of Antarctica that was like 70 degrees. And we had uncharacteristically beautiful weather. And in fact, our guides were like, we've never had a cruise here that had 4 days of perfect sun. And so we've never seen this many sunsets. Like this something is definitely not the same about this trip. So it was a really unique experience. Um, Paradoxically very challenging to get there, but yet when you're there, it's insanely stunning and beautiful and easy. But but getting there is really hard. Like you have to fly to the very lowest city, like the basically Ushuaia, which is the biggest, it's like the lowest city in this hemisphere. And then you have to take this large cruise liner through what's called the Drake's Passage. And Drake's Passage is basically one of the most insane things to do because these waves are like 20 to 30 feet. And so you were being like swayed right and back forth. Like people were getting sick. Like there was actually a dance party that was happening in like, imagine an entire room of people dancing, swaying back and forth. It was it was almost like, so this trip was interesting. It was a combination of, like world-class DJs and musicians, world-class entrepreneurs and investors, really incredible programming. We had Mark Hyman, who is an absolute luminary, and I think it might be a levels advisor, right? And we had programming, music, parties, and Antarctica. And so putting that all together in a trip makes it to it's a peak experience times 10, but it's also like coming back from that, I felt like I was recovering from Burning Man. Like it was not an easy transition back into normal existence. I had 10 days of, basically being offline. 'Cause it costs like $350 to get 5 gigs, so you really don't wanna be on your computer a lot because it's expensive. But, um but I have to say, seeing seals and seeing penguins and seeing raw nature in front of you and just being able to put your feet on a continent that, like, is so remote and foreign is awe-inspiring, but it completely made me step back from everything I'm doing in my life and pause because I'm like, oh my god, it's really hit me. We're in an environmental crisis. We're also in a war, and there's a war happening when I'm coming back, and there's going to be a major food crisis, and there's a major health crisis, and then there's like all these political crises happening all at once, and I'm coming back and I'm looking at myself thinking, "What can I do to make more impact now versus the current plan I had for my company I was working on was about 10 years, $1 billion it was gonna cost." And I actually looked at this plan and I go, "What the hell am I thinking? We don't have enough time to be wasting on things that are gonna take that long. I need to be doing things for humanity now." So I've actually been, like, spending the last 5 days realigning a lot of my priorities with business and really, like, trying to think through how to start creating more value for consumers now about learning about the science of love and what the neurobiology of love can teach us about healing, and safety versus threat. And I think we're facing so many threats that we need more than ever to find ways to connect. And what was so profound for me on this trip was the sense of, holy crap, there's a lot of threats we're all facing together collectively as humanity. But more than ever, I'm like, oh my God, this is the moment that we all realize we need each other and we need our bonds because our bonds are going to protect us and help us thrive in the midst of adversity. And, so it was a life-changing trip, by far the best trip I've ever taken, but also so deeply awe-inspiring and also kinda terrifying because 'cause you're like, "Oh shit, things are melting." And it's really happening. You can't avoid it when you look at it firsthand.
Amazing. And I think it's interesting hearing you talk about kind of reframing a little bit and how to bring value like as quickly as possible. I think just looking at your work, I mean, you I think bring so much value just every single day by just what you are talking about on social media and on podcasts and helping spread awareness of things that a lot of people are just not aware of, like the relationship between emotional health and physical health. And I think, we are basically all the human impact things that you're talking about, war, choices that drive, climate change, isolation and disconnection. Like, I think one of the ways probably both of us look at this is like, this is the product of brains, and brains are cellular structures that are basically dictated by hormones and all sorts of things and food. And so, one of the like table stakes things that we have to figure out is like how to make that organ and that system and that whole body within the whole body like function properly. And I think the way that you think about that is very unique. And I'd love for you to just maybe, before we dive super deep into things, to kind of just talk about how you personally define and think about health, and about what a healthy functioning body and mind actually is. Like, what does that look like? How should it feel? And what does it mean to actually be healthy in your framework?
Yeah. I mean, so when I was younger, I was like, "Oh, health is just like this goal that we have. We get to this point and we're like optimally well." And when I was a teenager, I was like going through puberty and I had all sorts of hormone dysfunction because I lived in the Midwest. I grew up with a lot of antibiotics. I grew up, just a little background. It might help people understand why I am the way I am by understanding that I was not always glowing health. I was a sickly child. I was born with a traumatic birth. I ended up having a lot of antibiotics. I was in and out of hospitals. I had pneumonia as a child. I had chronic strep throat. I had my tonsils out. I had gut dysfunction. I had mood disorders because I had ADHD as a result of the gut brain axis being completely thrown off. I had impacted teeth. I had to have surgery in 6th grade to bring, to fix my mouth. And then when I hit puberty, my hair went from straight to curly and I started breaking out all over my back. My feet smelled. I had hormones all over the place. And I did not know what the heck was wrong with me. And so I said to myself, Molly, someday you're going to find out how your body works and you're going to fix all these problems. So by the time I was in 9th grade, I was already taking supplements. I was already trying to hack my body. I was already trying to fix things. I was 100% a perfectionist. I was like in, varsity sports and getting straight A's and in student government, and I was fearless. But I went through patterns in my life where I would just like work myself into the ground and burn out. Right. So I have these like cycles of achievement and burnout and like perfectionism and dysfunction in so many different ways. And I just always hoped that there would be a day where I would wake up and everything would be perfect. And it never actually came. However, what did happen is I committed myself to a life of pursuing health. And so as a result of discovering that health is not this picture perfect moment in your life where you're like, boom, I'm finally healthy. I discovered in the process of studying health that health was about adapting and self managing in the face of adversity. So, this concept of adaptation is why it's so important not to see health like as the WHO's definition, like it's pie in the sky, complete absence of disease or infirmary, complete mental, physical, and emotional well being. Like that is not reality for humanity because life is going to challenge you. And truly, health is all about how do you handle those challenges? How does your body bounce back? How do you become resilient to stress? How does your body not lose its adaptive capacity, its functional capacity? How do you maintain a healthy blood sugar, blood pressure in the midst of facing challenges? And so, I really got lucky because I was like gifted a very amazingly loving family. I was gifted an ability to like stay focused and persistent on a goal of becoming a doctor. And I was also gifted at being basically fearless in pursuing a path of my own desire rather than the desires of the society around me or other people who thought I should be a mainstream doctor. So as a result, I got to spend 10 years basically doing research and building a practice and working with companies that gave me a platform to basically study health and figure out how to optimize it. And because I found a niche in really well-paid investors, executives, and entrepreneurs who were happy to plunk down lots of cash to run labs, I was basically offered a golden opportunity out of my own design. I specifically was like, there have been doctors who've taken care of kings in the past, and I will be one of these doctors who takes care of kings of the present. And I did it. But in the process, I discovered that money doesn't buy health. It certainly can extend, life, and it certainly does make it more possible for you to have health. But really, the secret to health is actually in the relationship you have to yourself and your body, your environment, and those around you, and being able to take in information and act on that information and actually adapt to different demands. So whether it be environmental demands, whether it be work demands, relationship demands, or even physiological demands, like things like for example, like bodies break down. How are you going to adapt to those breakdowns? Does your body have enough resources to bounce back? Do you have the capacity to change your behavior to optimize the chances of your body staying strong and healthy? So I got I got kind of interested in this idea of dynamic, like more this idea of allostasis versus homeostasis. So most of medicine learns that homeostasis is all about vital signs. So you go to your doctor once a year, 15 minutes, you get your labs checked. And that's a snapshot. But I was like, that doesn't seem to be enough information to make really good decisions because it's like if I just took a picture of you one day of the year where you looked really great, you that does not tell me about the 375 days of the year where you may not have looked that way. You may not have felt that way. So I was like, what would health monitoring look like if it was time course data versus snapshot data? And I was like, okay, I can get wearables. So I got really into wearables, right? I was like, I can just put wearables on my patients and see what happens to their sleep, their stress, their movement. And so I was like very much a big part of like the quantified self movement in the very beginning. But I'd been asked to do a consulting project for a company, and they were like, "We can monitor 21 different biomarkers in interstitial space, but which one should we do and why?" So I was like, "Huh." all right, I'm going to go into the physiology textbooks. I'm going to go into all of the different, like research papers, and I'm going to figure this question out. And I ended up writing countless pages on all the different options you could measure. But I was like, glucose. Glucose is the most important marker of your interstitial space because it is literally how you are adapting to what you eat, how you move, how you sleep, where you live, who you talk to, like it responds to everything. It's such an incredible marker because it's so dynamic. And so I was like, wow, this is also a really important marker that seems to go wrong in a lot of people. And it's an important marker that we don't have good monitors for, except for diabetics. So this company was working on hardware for the masses. Turns out that by working with this company, I ended up getting asked to join their team, and I know I worked part-time for them because they needed a head of medical science. And I remember working with them, and I was like, guys, why are we developing hardware again? Because like we've built a software product and it works, and I found some customers, and we might want to just work on the software. And they were like, no, we're gonna work on hardware. And the company folded, and they ended up selling to another company. And I was like, oh my God, like my biggest problem, Casey, in my career has been I'm about 5 to 10 years ahead of most people. And so as a result, it's like really hard to build companies when you're like, oh crap, I'm like literally way too far ahead. And honestly, I remember going to investors at the time and I was like, I think these glucose monitors can be used to make products and they're like, great idea. This is really useful. And I didn't have enough confidence at the time to build a company around it. But honestly, like I feel like really grateful that I got to be a part of helping stem a movement, like part of what I'm here to do is be a catalyst. Like I am 100% the kind of person who if I enter your life, you're going to be changed. And so whether you like it or not. And I think that's what I'm here to do for humanity is to help be a catalyst of change. And the beauty of that is I get to like discover new things and then help companies like yours and other companies like really transform because like what we're trying to do with what Levels is doing and what any other company in CGM is trying to do is actually transform people's understanding of what health is all about. And you cannot really understand health if you don't understand blood sugar because blood sugar is easily, I think, probably the most important dynamic marker of health that we have.
Mm. Oh my gosh. Amazing. I
Lots
think
to
that
discuss.
it
Yeah.
What's that?
Lots to discuss. That's a long life
Lots
story.
to discuss. No, I love that. So much of that resonates with me. And I just want to circle back to that amazing definition that you sort of talked about with health, which was the body's ability to adapt and
Self-manage.
self-manage in the face of adversity. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that is so fascinating. And I think, that is something that, I just want to highlight again, because that's probably not a definition of health that people have really heard before. But, there's so much embedded in that I think both of us think about a lot, which is, the cell or the body is this just incredible, like it's like 37 trillion cells plus all these, trillions of bacterial cells changing constantly, literally every day. We're like, taking food and, signals from the external world, the environment, putting into our body, rebuilding ourselves, shape shifting changes. Like we're a different body second to second and minute to minute. And, we don't have any real insight into what's happening inside that black box. And that's where I think your insight about biowearables and continuous biofeedback is so important because we've I think we're both trained in medicine, but also just as people to think of the body as this static entity that like we have a body and then the body's born and then the body dies and it's this thing and it's not. It's like, if we could actually see under a microscope what was going on, we'd see that we're just this buzzing hive of atoms that's constantly being transferred with the, or constantly being recycled with the external world. Literally even like breathing in and out air, we're like constantly converting things. And it's just so fat. And so without any insight into that process or without even a mental model for understanding that's actually what the body is, I think it really undermines the idea of habits because with habits are about daily consistency, knowing that you're constantly changing and that the situation is changing. And you don't just get to like have one healthy meal once a month and think that it's actually, that's going to make a big difference because we're constantly rebuilding and constantly adapting. And so I think that adapt word is so important. And I just think about my own life, different periods of challenge where there was more adversity, and it was so obvious that if I didn't change what I was doing a little bit, like get more sleep or do more mindfulness or eat particularly anti-inflammatory foods, I would break down because my body had higher needs. Like, just thinking about after my mom passed away, like last year, like that was a huge psychosocial, stressor. I'm sure my stress hormones were much higher. I was probably churning through B vitamins way faster, as I was making those stress hormones. If you don't recognize that and adapt, like the body will not be able to kind of do what it needs to do. Similar, like if you have an infectious disease, you may need more selenium or whatever to like, so it's just, I think that framing that you talk about, like there's just so much built into it that gets us back to thinking about how important it is to both understand what's going on inside the black box of the body, but also how important like daily habits are for
Yeah.
like
Well,
keeping
let's
up with
talk a little bit about
things.
habits. I mean,
Yeah.
people forget that like the whole purpose of developing health habits is that you can literally offload work of having to think about being healthy into the part of your mind that doesn't have to think about being healthy. So like when I wake up in the morning and I go in and it just I have a planned exercise. Like I don't always know what I'm going to do in the morning, but I know that I'm going to move my body. It has taken me like literally 10 years to get into a consistent fitness habit. Okay. I spent basically part of my 20s sedentary in school and it destroyed my health. Turns out that you need to send signals into your body to make more energy, and exercise is the signal to make more energy. And when I figured that out, I was like, well, this is a non negotiable. If I want to have energy, I have to exercise. Like, duh. Now, with that, it's a habit. It's like, this is easy for me. Like, it's not, I don't have to think about it. I just have to go and do it, and I can go out inside and run if I can't do anything else. Now, um, the interesting thing about exercise is like, I spent a lot of time in the pandemic lifting weights, but then I ended up somewhere where I didn't have a gym, and so I started running, and it was fascinating to watch my body go from strong and muscular to lean and lithe, and it was, like, very fast. I mean, I lost my butt like that. Like, I burned off that butt fat, and my muscles started getting leaner, and it's fascinating that people don't realize that literally by the way that you live your life, it sends a signals to your cells to adapt to those different demands. So your body's always trying to predict the next day and prepare you for the next day. Your body's actually beautifully designed to make the next day hopefully more likely to keep you alive. Like they want to make sure that you're going to be alive tomorrow. So your body's like, okay, if I didn't move my body today, that means I may not need to have as much energy for tomorrow because I'm in a rest mode. So that means that I'm going to make less energy. And so the problem with that is that if you don't move your body for like a week, your body starts going into, oh shit, I'm immobilized. Oh crap, I don't actually like it actually causes more stress in the body not to move your body than to move your body. There's what's called illness behavior or sickness behavior. And that actually, well, that's literally a product of metabolic dysfunction. Your body will start going into these energy saving modes in order to preserve itself. But in the process, it's highly maladaptive long term. So we need habits in order to not have to think about being healthy all the time, but also because if we don't do things habitually, that our body will adapt to unfortunately, your body's designed to be healthy based on its genetics. Okay. So your genetics are primitive genetics. Your genetics are like, I live on a savanna and I'm here to move my body all day long. And I'm also here not to eat all day long. So it turns out that like we now have this like environment of like constant food availability and a lot of sedentary behavior. And so the real challenge for most modern humans is like, how do I adapt to a life that is totally different than my genetics are designed for? Okay. Like that is the question. Um, we're really not designed to have constant threat. We're actually not designed to have like constant news on causing psychological threats. And we're not designed to have constant comparison threat from like looking at Instagram and saying, oh, this perfect body that's completely filtered. We're designed to actually be mostly peaceful in tribes with surrounded by people who could keep us safe and to be occasionally afraid of dangerous, neighboring tribes or animals that would come and attack you. We're really not designed to be in this constant threat state. So chronic disease, the new model for chronic disease is actually based on chronic threat versus safety. And so there's literally so I've been talking to this guy, Stephen Porges, who's like an absolute visionary thinker, and Sue Carter, who's also an absolute visionary thinker. And they're so interesting, this couple, because he has figured out the autonomic nervous system's behavior in threat versus safety. And she has figured out, and by the way, you should look up polyvagal theory if you haven't heard about it. She has figured out the neuropeptide biology of love and safety, love, safety, trust and bonding versus threat and danger, right? So she figured out the neurobiology of this, and he figured out the autonomic nervous system. So these two people somehow became, a couple. It's almost like destiny, right? The way people sometimes come together. And I came to know them because I was trying to ask myself, why do people make the wrong decisions for their food and their lifestyle when we know we should eat better and we know we should exercise more and we know we should stress out less and we know we should sleep more? Why do people not do these things? Like, that was my biggest question. I was like, there's something missing here in my understanding of humanity. And I was talking to a friend of mine today because I was like pointing out that, there's just quite a lot of there's a lot of problems in obviously modern American society right now. And I was trying to explain to him what I thought was actually the root cause of our obesity epidemic. And I wrote to him basically that like the real pandemic in bodies is a state of constant threat that get manipulated by food companies who know the foods that hijack reward pathways, which lessen the threat signaling and contributes to energy imbalances, metabolic disease, and obesity. So like I've been asking myself, like, why is it that people make reach for the cookie instead of the apple? Like, what is the reason why they go for the bad food? And it's like, we forget that, like, we have these reward pathways that are specifically designed to keep you alive. And food companies have specifically hijacked these reward pathways so that you turn to those foods to send safety signals to the brain. And chronically eating these high pleasure bliss point foods contributes to maladaptive health, right? Like we end up with metabolic diseases. We end up with, high fat, high sugar foods and fast foods and processed foods cause visceral fat. They cause ectopic fat storage. They cause blood sugar dysregulation. They cause metabolic inflexibility. But it's actually the bigger global issue is not that these foods are inherently evil. It's that people are being manipulated by constant threat signaling. It's not a surprise that if you watch the news, it's threat signaling, and then what is the commercial? It's fast food. It's threat signal and it's reward pathway. Threat signal, reward pathway. And it's like if you don't notice that this is happening, then you are literally being completely manipulated by companies, by the media, and you cannot blame yourself for being obese and being and like struggling. Like I actually look at people who are impoverished and I have a completely different perspective on why people are obese because their bodies are literally trying their best to survive. And they don't realize that they're being manipulated by these greater powers outside of them that have not, like the government has not made it easy for people to eat healthy food. That is not the same case in most countries. Our government has not made it easy for people to eat healthy, first and foremost, by the food policies that we have. We have constant threat signaling in the media, which our government has not stopped and totally supports. And we don't we basically designed a society around cars. So because we all drive and we don't walk, we don't move our bodies, the outcome of a society designed to hijack pathways that would actually save energy and store energy is too much saved and stored energy, which is unfortunately metabolic dysfunction in a lot of cases. So it's actually fascinating because if you actually just look at the big picture, you're like, oh, this whole obesity epidemic makes sense. It's not about the individual at all. It has nothing to do with most people. Most people actually are not trying to be obese. And blaming them as some sort of moral injury is like actually looking at addicts and saying, "Oh, addicts are just morally inferior." I now look at addiction as people hijacking their own reward pathways to fulfill the lack of social connection that they cannot find in their relationships. And when you look at every person just don't talk to a person who's an addict, there was some sort of major life breakdown with their relationships that led to them having to turn to addiction. There was some sort of relationship breakdown with themselves that led to them feeling worthless, led to them feeling completely like they couldn't find pleasure in being who they are. And so they turn to drugs that activate these reward pathways and they become stuck. Their body can never get back to that original high. And so they're chasing the dragon and then they become disconnected from their families and communities because they are no longer seen as normal people. They're seen as addicts. They are a different type of person. They are dangerous. They are thieves. They prostitute themselves and they do all sorts of things that normal people would never do. And so because they've been disconnected from their families and their communities, drugs are literally the only way that they can get those rewards. So it turns out that relationships and loving relationships are the ultimate source of reward actually. So like we get super rewarded by feeling connected and loved. And this is like what everyone is actually searching for is connection and love and feeling safe. And the ultimate safety molecule is oxytocin. And oxytocin and safety comes from feeling like you have secure attachment with your family members and your parents and your friends, feeling like people delight in seeing you, feeling like you have resources to survive and people can help you, can share resources with you to help you survive, feeling safe, feeling psychologically safe, feeling physically safe, having a roof over your head, and feeling, basically that like you can explore your inner and outer world and it's okay. So like I've really kind of boiled down my health perspectives after spending so long in biology and just, laboratory tests and monitoring tools. I was like, "Oh my god, I have to actually take a step back from all of this. There's actually this much bigger problem, which is global human disconnection from community and family and them in ourselves." And that's really where the Adama bioscience was born. It was like, I need to figure out how to help people truly connect because the metaverse is going to cause massive amounts of mental illness. If we thought that addiction and drugs were bad, just wait till people are addicted to the metaverse. It is going to cause rippling effect to multi-generational downstream effects on humanity if we are not careful. And yeah, I think we're at a massive turning point. And I mean, that was a huge like lecture, but I'm actually glad we're on this podcast because I would really like to get the transcript of this. This is good stuff.
Oh my God. I could literally listen to you talk all day, Molly. And like, I want to,
Uh,
yeah, as you were talking, I was like, oh, I want that to be a clip. I want that. Like, it's just so, so amazing, your vision about all of this. And so something I took away from what you just said is that, it's funny. We talk a lot about root causes to health. I mean, that's what I think people like you and I and other functional and precision medicine people are focused on. What's the root cause? And a lot of time we get down to, and that usually gets down to cellular dysfunction, something related to the mitochondria, and how food and whatnot are hijacking the mitochondria. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that like we actually need to go a layer deeper than that, which is actually what's driving some of the behaviors that lead to that root cause dysfunction, which comes down to a really like primordial screw up in the way we're living, which is that the thing that keeps us on the on the better side of the balance between threat and safety, and therefore a sense of survival need, is totally being hijacked by modern culture. And I think one question I have, I'd love your thoughts on, is like, I think the average person out there is like, we've only known modern life. And so like we think it's normal. And so you like, let's just think of the average quote unquote healthy mid-30 person. It's like they've got their iPhone, they've got the emails and texts coming in every day, they've got the notifications, they've got Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Snapchat, all the things. A million dings. They go in a car, there's honking, there's red lights, there's green lights, there's people around them. They may not be that tight with their extended family because they live all over the world. You have a good relationship with your family, but like see them a few times a year. You've got some friends, a lot of your friends you're talking to online. It's kind of like I'm just like kind of trying to paint a picture of like normal life. And then they'd be like, yeah, I've got great relationships. I've got great connection. I don't feel threatened. I feel fine. But like, how do you look at that modern world and how you think some of that is actually translating into sort of stuff in our brain that we might, I guess what I'm asking is like, people may not even be aware where they are on the threat safety spectrum because we just think all of this is so normal. So what do you think? Can you talk a little about the neurobiology of what's happening, even if we generally feel pretty good, but we are living in normal life, and maybe like how to wake up to that, and then how people should be thinking about how to kind of get on top of this?
yeah. Um, I think the thing that I really want to emphasize first and foremost is like there's kind of two main concepts here that I want to get clear. And one is and this is actually something that I, I guess I want to bring this up because it's like it's in my mind and I want to bring it up before I talk about the second topic. So the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of power and energy and capacity and allostatic load. So that relationship is really important. The second thing I want to talk about with you is this idea of threat versus safety. And because it actually has a lot to do with our allostatic load and has a lot to do with our capacity. So basically, like I really truly believe that power and energy dynamics underlie so much of life. on a microscopic level, on a molecular level, and on a macro level. So part of the reason why Elon Musk is the richest man in the world is because he figured out how to get us off of the grid in a lot of ways, like get us off of the oil and gas grid and figure out how to create more of an electric life, right? He figured out how to create electric cars. That is part of the reason why he's so wealthy is because this understanding of, oh my God, what if we use battery power instead of oil? That would actually change the way that society looks. It would change the way the environment looks. And he did it. So I actually think that like the war in Ukraine and like what's going on with the basically resources with these like large superpowers. If you actually look at almost every major war, it's almost always a war on resources. And sometimes it's a war in the name of God, but it's almost always in the war in the name of resources. So like one of the fundamental unfortunate aspects of being a human on earth is that you need to find resources to survive. And so the most original evolutionary adaptation that happened to the creation of mitochondria occurred with bacteria being engulfed by single-celled organisms, and they harnessed the bacteria's capacity to make energy and gather energy, and that actually enabled human evolution. That was one very important facet of evolution. Um, so in the process, so we're all here to figure out how to gather energy and then have enough resources to survive. So when we have a lot of resources, we have a lot of functional capacity, we have more energy than we need to do work, right? And one of the most beautiful things about the body is that we can actually run on let's say this is like something with sugar in it. We can run on the grid or we can run on our own battery power, which is our own fat, right? So you can what's called flipping the metabolic switch is like you're a hybrid vehicle. So you can go from running on the grid to running on your own fuel. But most people have never figured out how to do that because most people are only on the grid and they're metabolically inflexible. They cannot gear shift. So they're basically like a gas guzzling car. So I believe that basically, if we can crack the code of energy metabolism and metabolic flexibility, this is about as important to the future of humanity as it was figuring out how to create electric cars. So, like, this is why your company is so important. And honestly, like, I needed to probably do more work with you guys because I have an entire program on building metabolic flexibility and understanding how to measure metabolic flexibility. But this is a major problem, because most people are metabolically flexible. Most people have too much ectopic fat storage. Most people cannot gear shift. Most people are just unfortunately, the wheat crisis is actually a bigger reflection of the fact that we have a major crisis of people being on the grid to survive. Like they cannot like if you don't eat constant carbs, then you run out of fuel and you bonk. That's most people. Most people are actually not able to drop into fat metabolism. So when they stop eating food, they run out of energy and their brains start turning off. I've seen this in athletes, I've seen this in the obese. So this is really an important facet of health that like the problem that happens if you run out of fuel is your brain starts going, "Oh shit, I don't have any fuel. What am I going to do?" And you start going into like essentially survival mode and threat mode and you start freaking out. Um we need to get people metabolically flexible so that they can be okay for not eating for 3 days. Like that is the natural design of a human body is actually totally fine to fast. If you need to go without food for a week, you're good. That's not normal for most Americans. Most Americans can't even go without a few hours without eating. So like this is an important concept that I think is very related to understanding metabolic health and why your company is so important. Um so like basically, that's one facet of health that I think is worth talking about because, like, most people are actually very much threatened by the way that they're so tapped into the grid and the food supply that they just can't survive without it, right? Like, they don't grow their own food, they can't tap into their own fat, they couldn't go with a few days without eating, and in a modern world, we actually need to be very resilient and very metabolically flexible because there may be times in the near future, there's gonna be a massive famine potentially if we don't figure out the Ukraine soon. If they don't plant winter wheat, 100 million people might starve. So, like, this is a big discussion around metabolism and macroeconomics and what's like resources. When we have resources, we feel safe. When we don't have resources, we run out of energy, we start going into panic mode. The body starts going into, "Oh shit, I'm not gonna survive." Right? So survival mode is one mode, and then like safety resourced is another mode. Now, I think the second thing I mentioned talking about was specifically like these two modes, okay? So essentially like trauma, chronic isolation, chronic stress, these things are not really normal for humanity, right? So like we're pack animals. We are designed to live in groups. We evolved genetics to live in groups. That would have been protective. Loneliness is a primitive hunger signal designed to get you closer to your tribe. And anyone who tells you it's all like all these other things is just like missing the big picture of the evolutionary biology. So trauma, like, yes, of course, in primitive times, like things were occasionally very traumatizing, but it was a different world, different type of trauma. Like the kind of trauma we have nowadays is all sorts of screwed up, right? And then chronic stress, like we were really designed to essentially evolve to be in a state of occasional acute stress. Like we have this perfectly designed system to manage acute stress, and it gets very maladaptive and chronically. So what happens in this situation is that it upregulates vasopressin signaling. And vasopressin signaling is actually a lot stronger naturally in men. So men actually do a little bit better than women when it comes to like when men are under threat, they mobilize and they fight, right? For the most part. There's basically three ways that your body really want to respond to major threat. It's fight, flight, or freeze. And Stephen Porges has basically studied this. And freeze means immobilizing in fear. Okay. And then fight means I'm gonna go off and fight, um and then flight means I'm just gonna try to run away, right? So that's something that's kind of important to understand. Um, but essentially, in the short term, these behaviors would have been, essentially adaptive. But in chronically activating these stress signals and these stress systems and having trauma that puts your body in a state of hypervigilance means that you're basically stuck in threat mode. So everyone who has most of my clients who have had chronic fatigue have had not only chronic stress, but a major life stressor on top of chronic stress that just broke their body and got them stuck into threat mode. Usually there was an infection involved, like an intercellular infections are pretty bad. So COVID and what happens when you have viral infections that become chronic is people who get basically long COVID is their body was already had low functional capacity. And then they faced a major physiological threat and potentially even psychological threats typically on top of that. And that their body just didn't have enough capacity to meet the demands. And so when your capacity and your demands are not matched, then your body will break. So your capacity is too low, your demands are too high, your body starts to break down. And that's kind of like the rule I've learned in health is like you really want to build as much capacity. And I look at capacity actually as a function of cellular capacitance. So the mitochondria are organelles that basically take in substrates, food, air, and water, and they transform it into energy through what's called the electron transport chain, which powers a turbine, which causes as an electrochemical gradient that creates a battery and a capacitor. So capacitance comes from the differential charge between the inner and outer membrane of the mitochondria and the inner and outer membrane of the cell. So there's actually charge differential on membranes. And then there's also electrochemical differences which actually enable a polarity, which enables the cell to be a battery and a capacitor. So your mitochondria are really important to producing energy and storing energy. So when we have dysfunctional mitochondria from a lifestyle that happens to be filled with high fat, high sugar foods, which actually causes metabolic gridlock in the mitochondria, they become dysfunctional. They don't work normally. They don't actually handle demands as easily. They can't even mobilize energy as well as they should. And so you have to take care of your mitochondria if you want to be a healthy human. And, like, literally, blood sugar is like the only way that we can see into mitochondrial function right now. There's literally no other way that we can actually have any idea of what's going on in mitochondria unless we have a blood sugar monitor. And so, I would say that continuous stress monitors are also quite important. Like, people don't realize this, but mitochondria actually modulate the stress system. They actually have, enzymes on the outer membrane that create epinephrine and norepinephrine, and they also help produce cortisol. So they're very important for stress signaling, and they're very important for blood sugar signaling, blood sugar production, energy production. And so they're literally sensing and integrating signals from the environment to literally decide where the energy goes and to decide what am I going to do? Am I in safety right now? Can I reproduce? Or am I in threat right now? And do I need to defend myself? So what happened was Robert Naviaux, this phenomenal researcher, basically figured out that there was a molecular interpretation of the polyvagal theory that he kind of figured out on his own. And him and Steven are friends. And basically, like, he's figured out that the cells under chronic threat can actually develop what's called the cell danger response. And the cell danger response, if it gets stuck, and if your cells get stuck in threat mode, you can't actually have normal metabolism. Turns out, you can't actually have healthy metabolism if you are under constant threat. So what gets us out of threat? Right? Like what gets us out of threat? This is the literal holy grail of chronic disease medicine. Like this is if this gets figured out in our lifetime, then basically we will be able to reverse almost all chronic diseases. But right now, the biggest question is like how do we get the body out of threat mode? And inflammation, by the way, I look at inflammation and people are going to argue with me with this all day long. I have friends that are totally obsessed with inflammation, but I'm going to just try to simplify things for the masses. Inflammation is almost like alarm signals going off in your cells and mass. And when there's alarm signals going off, you can't it's like there's a fire alarm in the house. You can't also have normal operations of the house if the fire alarm is still on and ringing, there's a problem. And so inflammation is often an end result of metabolic dysfunction. It's a cause and a consequence of metabolic dysfunction. And so we have got to figure out how to build more capacity into younger, healthy humans so that they don't end up with chronic disease when they're in midlife. And the problem is that most people wait till midlife to do anything about their health. And that is way too late typically because you usually have hypertension, high cholesterol, and all these problems. And so, what I'm really interested in, my personal interest, is what is love in a neurobiological like definition, and and how does love make us stronger? How does love help us share resources? How does love help us like what is this bond that's created between people? Why is that bond protective? And why is it that me being around friends and family that make me feel safe somehow enables my body to like naturally drop into normal metabolism, naturally start to lose weight, naturally start to relax. Like, what is it? And I think the common pathway here from this mentor of mine, Sue Carter, she's like, Molly, the common pathway is oxytocin. So oxytocin and vasopressin are like brother and sister. Vasopressin is all about war, it's all about threat, it's all about danger, it's all about mobilization of resources in order to defend yourself, it's all about reactivity, it's all about fight, flight, freeze. And oxytocin is all about basically rest, recover, recuperate, heal, relax. And essentially it is the biomarker of social bonds. It is the biomarker of um, how we how like basically mother and child when like a mother it bears a child, what happens is a mass amount of oxytocin is released to enable new life to be made. Literally, the birth is a product of oxytocin release because you cannot have birth without oxytocin. It literally enables your body to undergo enormous stress and survive it. So it's like, and also it causes the bonding of mother and child. It causes the bonding of parent and child. So it's baked into how we feel safe, right? And so anything that messes up that relationship between parent and child, whether it be dysfunctional attachment patterns because parents were abusive or neglected their children, what happens is the body gets stuck in threat mode. And I got really interested in this specifically because I was interested in sexual dysfunction in women and why sexual trauma causes sexual dysfunction. And it turns out that when women experience sexual trauma, they what is supposed to be a pleasurable, safe experience of sex is a threatening and dangerous experience that upregulates vasopressin signaling, and your body actually goes into a state of if you're stuck and you're being raped, you get this thing called a mobilization with fear versus a mobilization without fear, which is what you need to actually have a healthy sex life. So I basically figured out why rape and trauma causes sexual dysfunction in women because it changes the neurological settings of the autonomic nervous system, and it makes sex a dangerous experience. So essentially, this threat and safety paradigm is like making a lot of the decisions for you. And it's a paradigm that you can see at a macro level with war. It's a paradigm you can see in like a community level with resource sharing and resource allocation. It's a paradigm you can actually look at cellular level when you look at mitochondria that are constantly sensing, do I have the resources to meet my demands? If I don't, oh shit, since things are gonna break, right? And like I haven't completely been able to figure this out perfectly. A lot of this has literally come to me in the last week. So it's a great thing that we are doing this podcast because it's very fresh. But basically, I'm trying to come up with like a common unified theory of root cause health and disease because I think that there's something to these patterns that match multiple levels of existence. And I hope that made sense to
Mm, it
you.
does. It's amazing. Oh man, there's so much I want to drill into there. I think that is so important. One thing I thought was interesting that you talked about was that the metaverse is not actually going to solve the problems that we think it's going to
It's gonna cause
solve.
them
And
all.
so I'd love to hear, if it really comes down to connection and feeling a tribe, on sort of the biologic level, why does something like the metaverse or social media, um, or any of our digital communications not suffice?
Well, communication technology, electronic parenting, social media, all of these things enhance social isolation. So there is something that happens when you're in the presence of someone else, and it's called felt connection. And felt connection is not something that you can just reproduce through a Zoom call. You have to be present with someone to have truly felt connection. And largely because your brain makes electromagnetic fields around it and your heart makes electromagnetic fields around it. So there is something to be said about literally being in the presence of someone else and having felt connection with their energetic field. Like it's not, I'm not talking about energetic field in the woo sense. I'm talking about it in the EKG and EEG sense. Like it's measurable. So I believe that we were designed for proximity. Specifically, proximity engages the system of the brain that turns off the threat signal. If the person that we're with is safe. So if there's someone that we know and someone that we trust, being with them physically turns off threat signaling. So there was actually this I mean, I guess I can talk about that later, but if you really look at I was going to talk about the generalized unsafety theory of stress. I used to believe that this theory was very like I was like, oh man, this theory makes so much sense. The brain is on the theory is that the brain is on chronic stress a- as a baseline signal unless it's turned off. But
Mm.
I spoke to Steven literally at dinner a few days ago, and he goes, actually, that theory is flipped upside down. So, we are supposed to be in community we're supposed to be around people all the time. So, in the absence of human connection, the brain is on the chronic threat. Okay, that is the answer, okay? Like, that is literally why the pandemic caused 100,000 extra deaths of despair from addiction, because disconnection, physical, social, physiological disconnection sends threat signaling to the brain. And interestingly, when we get exposed to human connection, physical connection, and it's nourishing, it's safe, it's trusting. What happens is that oxytocin interacts with the reward signaling pathways. And those reward signaling pathways are designed to keep you alive, okay? And the two biggest ways that your brain tries to keep you alive is through food and through humans and through shelter as well. Shelter is important too. But largely safety comes from people, from food, and from resources and from shelter from the world around us. So if you look at that paradigm, you're like, "Oh, if we put a screen in front of." I mean, I actually did this today. I was at lunch with my mom, and I found myself kind of having a lull in conversation, and I looked at my phone, I was like, "Man, I got a million emails I could be checking right now. I should be checking my email." And I sat and I go, "No, I'm gonna be present, and I'm gonna force myself to be present, and I'm gonna ask questions about her family and her relationship to her sisters, her relationship to her mom, and I'm just gonna, like I'm gonna see what's going on in my environment." I found there was a turtle that was digging a hole outside of the restaurant. It was, like, by the beach, and I was like, I'm going to force myself to, like, not freak out that I'm not doing work right now, and I'm just gonna be present, and I could not believe how hard it was for me to be just sit still and not look at my phone. Like, we are so conditioned now to spend so much of our time on our phones that we actually struggle with truly being present with people, and that is only getting worse with children whose parents don't really know how to handle the amount of work that they have, put food on the table, and, like, so electronic parenting is basically becoming the norm where, like, if I don't know what to do with my child right now in this moment, I'm gonna put a screen in front of them. And so these kids are being conditioned to believe that this is just the way life is. Life just isn't about connecting to my loved one. I am more safe by connecting with a screen than I am connecting with a person. And that is unfortunately never going to truly offer the same kind of safety that human connection will offer. So we have to be, I mean, so I was with some parents in Antarctica that brought their kids with them. And I had a conversation with this mom about her daughters, and two of her daughters were really struggling with returning to school because they had become adapted to mask wearing and isolation. And so they were like very nervous and awkward going back to school because they're like, I don't know how to interact with my peers. I haven't done this for 2 years. I've been doing online learning for 2 years. I feel safe in online learning. I feel safe with the mask on. And so we've unfortunately programmed children to not know how to actually have social interaction. So if the metaverse becomes the baseline way people interact, then normal life is going to be really hard for people. It's going to actually make very little sense to people. They're not going to know how to be able to socialize properly. And I believe that I believe that if we do not look at this right now as a culture, then we are going to be heading into a very, very different world. America will not be a superpower. We will actually be in the decline. And it could literally mean just mass amounts of mental health problems completely skyrocketing and worsening and obesity. I mean, come on, let's talk about like not moving your body all day long. I mean, Ready Player One is an incredible movie and book, but the world people live in is terrifying in that movie. It is like the actual world around them is completely fallen apart. It's polluted, it's disgusting, and they're in these horrible apartments, and I don't want that to be reality. I don't want that to be the world we live in.
I think another part of this conversation that I think is interesting is kind of also around like the dopamine and serotonin aspect of it too. Like that you mentioned that, and just for people listening, like sort of if we had to generalize those and feel free to, correct me at all, but like dopamine being sort of like our reward circuitry that you've been talking about a lot, and that hit of desire and reward, and then serotonin being more of our contentment and like happiness and true like sense of calm. And unfortunately, it's sort of a zero sum game where if you're hitting the dopamine constantly, it's very hard to access and be able to really live in that content and like true happiness state. And of course, we're living in a dopamine nation. Anne Lemke from Stanford wrote this amazing book on this. And fortunately, lots of people are talking about this, like you, Andrew Huberman, Rob Lustig wrote Hacking the American Mind. And I think one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, you know, you mentioned that in a state of threat, our body's immediately going to look for pleasure and safety, something to like get us out of that bad feeling, which could be, could be anything that really spikes dopamine, like sugar, like, it could be drugs, opioids, even caffeine, I think it said sugar, alcohol, all these things that kind of tap it immediately. Oh my gosh, I feel good for a second. Everything's okay. But the irony is that the more you do that, like the more it makes it difficult to access that feeling. And so you increase that set point, and now you're in the adduction cycle of having to need more and more and more to kind of have that feeling. And so a paradigm I've been thinking about a lot recently, that what you were talking about got me thinking about more, was sort of this idea that, and also kind of getting into the hybrid car and being on the grid or off the grid, is that deprivation in some ways is actually a pathway to happiness
Oh my
and
gosh,
to
so
freedom.
true.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this so much because deprivation means you're getting off the neurobiological dopamine wheel and actually investing in your ability to create more serotonin and a sense of like safety, and to also then open up the ability to connect more deeply with people, because like you said at lunch with your mom, you're not just like looking for the hit, and so you're able to kind of have space to be able to invest and like um so it's like you mentioned about the being on the grid thing. I think this all actually feeds back into the mitochondria too, because if you're constantly overwhelming your body with sugar, which the huge irony here is that it's like the more energy substrate you put into the body, the more difficult it has making actual energy you can use. So it's like limiting the exposure and the consumption actually improves the machinery, like it doesn't gum it up. And you can produce more energy that you can actually use. So it's almost like you have to give up something to get something. But in our world, in a brain that gets a dopamine hit from having the consumption, it's like, that survival aspect of it, unfortunately, is just like, we're just literally cogs in this horrible, vicious cycle wheel. And we have to be aware of that, which is why I love this conversation, to consciously let our prefrontal cortex overcome that desire, kind of restrict a little bit so that we actually get the outcomes that we want. And every time I have a day where I have very few glucose spikes and I know I'm restricting my overconsumption of that substrate, I'm thinking about how my mitochondria are basically able to burn cleaner forms of energy and therefore give me freedom, essentially freedom from the grid, freedom from having to be on the teat of the sugar, because my body is actually learning how to burn a cleaner, fuel like fat and to use the battery. And it's like, just like if you have a battery and you're not plugged into the wall, that means you can be mobile. That means you can be flexible. That means you can move. Like, I want to be the battery. I want to be the electric car, but that requires some element of deprivation.
You
And
want
it
the ability
requires, yeah.
you
And
want the
so I don't,
ability to move the car out of the garage, because if you're sitting in a car
exactly.
pouring fuel into a car, it's not moving, it's gonna cause a lot of exhaust and it's not gonna be healthy, right? You could die.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
the car is supposed to be moving, and you're not supposed to be pouring fuel into it every day. You're supposed to use the
Yeah.
fuel, right? But
Yeah.
going back to your deprivation thing, super important. Uh Meditation has taught me that we are far more powerful than we have ever given ourselves credit for. And the things that you can do with your mind are absolutely astonishing if you can learn to sit. But the problem is that almost all meditation schools that are like they're all about deprivation to the point of discomfort. And so they're not really designed for the Western person. So most people will never actually understand the beauty of deprivation, because Vipassana is really just it's way more designed for an Indian person. Just like kind of like Ayurveda is kind of more designed for Indian genetics than it is for American genetics. So I stumbled upon this thing called Kapasana, and everyone's gonna go try to look up Kapasana. I'm sorry to say that it's a private, members only meditation group of badasses who you have to know this one guy, Jorge, in order to get in. However, I am going to figure out how to scale this someday when I have enough money to pay for millions of people to do Vipassana. But that is my definite goal. If I do become like a very wealthy human, I will 100% be giving away meditation retreats, because my guru did this. He like became very wealthy, started giving away meditation retreats as his and he started designing them. And the thing I learned was when you can learn to sit still and be with your thoughts and sit with your body and not move and just be present with whatever comes up, you are different than 99.9% of most people, because most people just can't do that. Most people just really cannot sit still and be quiet with their thoughts. And if you can learn to be, if you can learn to like sit quietly and not be eating and not be using food to make yourself feel safe and calm, you are also different than 99.9% of most people, because most people are constantly seeking movement, monkey mind thoughts, and food in order to feel safe, because they just don't know how to be present in the moment right now. And that is actually a huge shame, because if you can learn this, you can do all sorts of things with your mind that are incredible. Like you can actually get high off your own brain neurochemistry by just thinking about how drugs feel. Like I actually have done this, and I have been able to get my brain into a state of MDMA without having taken MDMA. And I was like, and honestly, I was like so busy on drug development for last year, trying to work on this combination drug that is it's a real life love drug. It's a great love drug. But I was so focused on it that I forgot that actually we can do this with our own minds. Like our minds are actually able to transform our biology and transform the way we feel. But most people just haven't harnessed the power in our heads, because they're under threat all the time. And their bodies are always in reactivity. Threat and reactivity is never going to be a real state of unfortunately growth and transformation. It actually is in a state of just trying to survive, which sucks, because man, if we could do one thing for humanity, it would actually just be getting people to sit still and be calm in the moment without having to react.
Yeah. Just like get off that dopamine hit treadmill and open up all these other parts of the brain that, thinking of it, yeah, like that zero sum game, you kind of can't have it all. Like it does change. It's like, well, what are you investing in then? And so I have a question, some of these coping things that we have. So like drugs,
Sure.
opioids, alcohol, sugar, for sure, sugar,
Yeah. Vegetable oil,
meat,
believe it or not, vegetable oil
but
we need to
yep,
talk about eventually.
we do. Yeah. Like,
Fast food, processed food.
porn. porn, sex
Or
addiction, things like that. If someone's dealing with any of these, so like they feel like they need to reach for these things to have a normal day, sugar, alcohol, porn, caffeine.
yeah.
Um, do you think that if that is a reality, like you need these things to have a normal day, there's some deeper work that people need to do or
Well, the
examine?
most important thing that most people need to do is actually take time away from normal life and pause. And the pregnant pause is 100% more valuable than sometimes not doing is the most valuable thing you can do for yourself. So, like, I got back from Antarctica and I was in a mild panic because I was like, "Holy shit, I need to change the entire strategy of my company. I have literally 10 calls with investors next week. I need to figure out how to communicate with them, what I'm gonna do." And I was, like, completely like, I had this total moment of panic, and I was, like, laying in my bed, and I was trying to meditate, and I just started crying. And I was just like, "Molly, just stop everything you're doing right now and just stop. Just stop because you do not have clarity, and if you do not have clarity, you should not act." And so the power of pausing, the power of taking a step back from your life and actually looking at how you're reacting and almost metacognition of your own existence. Like, you have to have metacognition. Like, metacognition is actually the real thing you need to build. It's ability to see the way that you think and examine yourself and the way that you behave and act from a third person's perspective. So I kind of did this metacognition of my existence in my life, and I was like, wow, I am in a moment of change. And in this moment of change, I need to actually cancel as many calls as possible next week. And I need to create some space for just deep thought. And I'm so glad that we're on this podcast today because actually talking to people is actually one of the best ways to clarify how you think. And like, even though I don't think everything I've said today is perfectly clear, there is some shreds of clarity here that are starting to come together into something that's bigger than even way bigger than who I am. It's bigger. It's actually like, what we're on this like, what you're doing at Levels and what I'm trying to do with the theory of love and connection, and being able to bring these to the masses, Casey. Like I get chills when I think about just how important it is for actually people to look at how they're living and ask themselves, "What can I do to actually create an assessment of, like, what's really going on for me right now?" So, not everyone's gonna get a doctor like you or I. But what you can do is ask yourself, okay, like right now in this moment, what is going on with my physical health? Like, am I working out consistently? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I circadian? I mean, I have friends that are super optimized humans and they still do not have normal circadian rhythms. And they literally regularly stay up till 6 a.m. working. And I'm like, that is a big area for improvement for some people. Have I taken a vacation in the last 6 months? When's the last time I actually connected with a family or a friend? When's the last time I put my feet on the ground outside and just looked at the sunrise and the sunset? Okay, like biologically, have I had my labs checked? Do I know what my biomarkers look like? Am I missing something with my hormones? Um, is there something going on with my gut health? Am I potentially nutrient deficient? Do I need to get my minerals and my nutrients checked? Like, let's just look at the baseline health situation. Right now, is my health stable or not stable? Um, am I craving dopamine because I'm actually tyrosine deficient, right? Like, a lot of people don't even know that they've been under so much stress for so long that they actually can start down regulating their own production of norepinephrine and dopamine. And you can actually measure this in homovanillic acid and vanillaminic
EMA.
acid. I can't pronounce
Yeah.
these things very well, but you can actually measure these things and you can measure your cortisol. And these are decent markers for, am I completely burned out or not? Okay. So ask yourself, am I like seeking this dopamine because my body's actually burned out and deficient in what it needs? So I had a client who I put on about a gram of tyrosine because he was super low in these markers. And I put him on a supplement called Zembrin to balance out the dopamine, because it was because you're gonna make more dopamine if you take tyrosine. And he calls me and we've made a bunch of changes in his health. And he goes, "Molly, I feel amazing." And I was like, "Well, not only that, but we've like fixed a bunch of imbalances in your health." And also he went through some changes in his relationships and honestly just like, where does your body need to be brought into balance? Like, what is it in your biology that needs to be brought back into balance? Second thing I would actually say is the psychological frameworks. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a quick class on how I think about the body. It's a holistic model, but this is how I kind of assess my clients. Where do you have unresolved trauma? If you have any, did you have you actually figured out your core wound? Do you know what happened in your childhood that changed everything for you? What was at that moment in your childhood that everything shifted? How were your relationships with your parents growing up? Was one of your parents absent? Was one of your parents anxious? Was one of your parents mentally ill? Did one of your parents abuse you? Did one of your parents neglect you? Figuring out your attachment style and figuring out your relationship with your parents and your family and your core wound, that changes your entire worldview of your existence. And so, very importantly, if you need a therapist, you need to start digging into the narrative of your life. Narrative therapy, internal family systems, so important, and so underutilized and so valuable. Attachment. I read a textbook called Attachment Dysfunction in Adults Comprehensive Repair. And I read almost the whole thing and I really basically came up with a summary of it. But it was like, oh my God, like I can rewrite the scripts I have around my parents and I can actually change my relationship to how I believe was a problem of my upbringing, which actually in reality was not that bad. So dealing with your relationship to your family members, your community, your trauma, that is your like psychological task. Okay. Like that is your job. You actually need to figure that out because that's going to change the way that you react to all of your relationships. It's gonna change the way you date. It's gonna change the way you raise your own children. And if we don't, as a generation, learn to deal with these attachments and these dysfunctions, then we're gonna be passing them on intergenerationally to our children and to their children. Third is your spiritual life. So a lot of people are atheist, agnostic, or just don't believe in God. Um, I don't care if you believe in God at all. You need a sense of purpose, and work provides a sense of purpose for many people, not all people. A lot of people actually find a lack of purpose in their work. One of the most interesting things I learned going to Japan was that it's a culture where people find value in excellence and in mastery, whether they are the cleaner of the toilet in the train station, or they are creating beautiful artisanal crafts or the best ramen in the world. Most people in this culture really have a culture. There's a culture of mastery. You can have purpose. In like there's a really beautiful talk, a really beautiful show on Netflix about this barbecue, this woman who does barbecue in Texas and is also the janitor of a high school. And she has just become a master of her craft. But she's also a janitor. And there's absolutely no shame in not being a CEO of a large tech company. Okay. There's no shame in not being the president of America. There's no shame in not being successful in the world based on monetary or societal values. Like most people right now are finding purpose and meaning and value in social credit systems, like likes on Instagram, like numbers of publications, like all these different collaborators on different scientific projects, like how much money they raised for their company, like who they're dating. And even I fell into all of these surrogate purpose success markers that like don't actually at the end of the day like what do they really do? They actually are markers of how well you feel connected to your social community. These are markers of how do I feel like people value me in my community? Do I feel connected to my community? Do I feel like I am accepted? Do I have esteem? Like esteem needs are part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but they are not necessarily our purpose in life. Our purpose is to like be human and connect and live and exist and enjoy our lives and have like meaningful work and meaningful relationships, right? And a lot of people are struggling because there's a lot of people out of work without meaningful work and there's a lot of people who don't have meaningful relationships. But spirituality to me has like been this breakthrough in my health in the last 3 years. So I went through a massive spiritual awakening and be careful asking universe for a taste of enlightenment because it might kick you in the face with a awakening. And so I had a profound spiritual awakening that literally transformed my entire life, but led me to meditation because I didn't know how to handle all the energy that was flowing through me. I was like literally like I can't handle going outside in San Francisco and seeing the pain and suffering of society and not being able to do anything about it. So I actually had to like it was almost like the moment where like the Buddha goes outside of his castle and he sees suffering in the world and he's like, "Shit, I can't be in a castle. I need to go out and help people." And then he goes out and lives the ascetic life. And then I actually did this whole thing where I just like went and started meditating and started like I basically like put all my stuff in storage and basically gave up with some interest in material things. And I started living in Maui and I started just like sitting with myself and sitting with my discomfort and sitting with my shadow and sitting with all the parts of myself I didn't want to see. And I examined my ego and I kind of had to just sit back and ask myself, where are my priorities? Why am I not being fulfilled by all means what the world sees as a successful human? And I had to ask myself, well, what is actually success? And why am I always striving for more? And like what's really missing from my life? And I was lucky to meet this guru who I asked him, what is your secret to conscious wealth creation? And he goes, Molly, the more people you serve, the more money you make. And I was like, oh, so it's service, actually. It's service that's the secret to happiness. It's service that's the secret to success. It's service. It's actually dedicating yourself to, like, actually serving other people, and I realized I'd been serving myself. I had been living for myself. I'd been living a very selfish life where I wasn't helping that many people, and I was kinda, like, in this world where I wasn't being fulfilled because I wasn't actually helping enough people that I didn't feel like I was helping enough people. And actually, from what I'm learning now is even beyond this, like, desire to help a lot of people is this desire to be able to witness people for who they are in the moment and not try to change them. Like, so much of real spiritual growth is letting go. And there's a phenomenal book that I recommend everyone read called Letting Go by Richard Hawkins, I believe. He was a physician who had a spiritual awakening. And he basically, like, it's the last book he wrote, probably one of the most important books because I discovered the power of letting go when I read the book and I go, cool. About an hour later, I was like, I'm just going to practice this letting go thing. And this happened in like November of last year. And I go, I'm going to go visit my mom and dad. And I normally try to change them. And like, I normally try to tell them they need to do all these different things to be healthier. And I'm just going to give that up completely and just try to love them for who they are in this right now in this moment and just not try to change them at all. And just send my mom and dad love and just come and see them and just be like, I'm just going to love them and not try to change them. And an hour later, after I said that intention, I got a call from my mom, who in the 10 years has never ever once done this. And she goes, Molly, I've got some labs back from my doctor. I'd really like your help reviewing them, and I want your help with optimizing my health. And this is somebody who has been very resistant to any of my advice I've ever given her. And I literally, I almost like almost dropped the phone because I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Person, I like, this is not my mom. Like, my mom had never asked me for help before, and it was that moment of, "Holy shit, is there something truly magical about the process of letting go that can enable me to be a happier, more fulfilled person and have better relationships?" And actually, so much of the process of helping patients heal is listening to them and having them tell you about their health and is being curious and not necessarily trying to change them, but just being like, I'm going to hear what you have to say and I'm going to do my best to be present for what your experience is. And I'm going to do my best to find you a solution. And I started doing this with my clients and it's been transformative. I've actually had clients literally heal problems without me doing anything for them by just listening to them and just being present for them and caring about them and helping them and making them feel supported. And that's when I started getting interested in the placebo response because I was like, wait, holy shit, how come nobody is studying this? Like, how come this isn't medicine yet? And I'm gonna leave it with that because I'm actually just now kind of like entering this new space with the company and I'm really getting into the research behind this. But yeah, there's so much more power in healing than we realize and just being able to really understand where's our problem and how do I really start focusing on that one thing that I need that's like the biggest lever in improving my health. And it may be wearing a glucose monitor. It may be dealing with your family trauma. It may be actually examining your own ego and your orientation around what makes you happy. And and if you can find that thing like that area of your health that is so out of balance that everything else is being a reaction, then you might because like some people are actually seeking dopamine because their blood sugar is all over the place and they're constantly trying to fix the fact that they're like not sure what's going on internally with their blood sugar. Some people are trying to get that dopamine because they just feel incomplete because they've never really had a secure relationship. Some people are seeking that dopamine because their work is not fulfilling and they're waking up every day having to pop Adderall because they don't love what they do. That is a much more complex answer than I think you probably wanted, but this is the reality of health. health is not that simple. But if you could break it down into its constituent components and really understand what's your root cause of your habitual behavior and desire for stimulation and reaction, then you can hack it, and that's biohacking. I mean, that's the beauty of health hacking. That's the beauty of health optimization is like you are a unique person with unique problems, and you can figure them out and get help to figure them out if you know what it is that you need to figure out. Like that's really the secret is figuring out what is your issue underneath your behavior and focusing on that versus trying to fix the porn addiction, right? Like the porn addiction is not the problem. The porn addiction is actually a problem of you not actually probably connecting with the opposite sex regularly and seeking like orgasm. I mean, honestly, like truth be told, everything I know about men who've mastered their sexuality has been watching men who've figured out tantra and Taoist sexual practices that have everything to do with deprivation. Like it's actually I was talking to Aubrey Marcus and he was like, I am so much more attracted to my partner when I don't have an orgasm because I'm in the constant state of desiring. So I often don't have an orgasm specifically so I can desire more. And I was like, boom, my brain blew up. I was like, dude, you are a genius. Teach that to the men of the world, you know? Like you made a really good point on this idea that like maybe what people really need is to just sit with their desire and to let it be instead of react to it. And like be present for it and just figure out what's underneath it, and then you can move through it.
So amazing. Um, when you were talking about two things. One thing I just wanted to reiterate that you said that I loved was this idea that our job is to figure out what our core wound is and address it. And I because fundamentally we all just by living, the birth process, childhood, just everything living in a world where our brains weren't ready to fully process it, that creates issues for everyone. And like, I feel like one of the most beautiful journeys of life can be to examine how that showed up in your world and then realize that so much of our maladaptive behavior and reactivity stems from that and that it's totally addressable, but is a job to do. And whether it's therapy or other modalities, there's so many, therapy being a great one. Like I just want to reiterate how powerful that process is. And I think for me personally, one of the things that emerged from that work for me was this idea that you also talked about of controlling other people. And I actually think controlling other people I think there's a dopamine hit that comes in that too. Like you were talking about your parents, and I'm in the same boat. I think being the type of physicians we are, I think one of the early stages of that journey is that you kind of want to try and help everyone and be like, I figured this stuff out and I know how you can be better and da da da. And then I don't know if this has been similar for you, but realizing that like the more you push, the more it pushes people away. And that sometimes that letting go process, exactly like you said, is actually, it's just so important because you're giving that energy of control is toxic and not good for not it waking up to the fact that all the pushing and all the trying to control has never actually led to the outcomes I am deeply desiring. And that maybe flipping the script actually is better for everyone involved because of the different energy. No one wants to be controlled. And I think that um, it goes back to the whole safety and threat thing. If we are feeling threat or fear, we want to control things. And so again, going back to root cause stuff, it's like, is it the threat and our fear that we're not addressing that's actually leading us to have some of these behaviors towards other people? And that's one thing, something I've thought about a lot is kind of the biggest fear out there, I think, for most people is the ultimate fear of mortality. Like, we are going to die. Like, and we in the Western world, we kind of ignore that. We don't have a lot of curiosity about it. We don't have good frameworks for what that really means or is. And I really think the healthcare system weaponizes our fear of death to basically get us to do anything they want, like take any pill, do any procedure. Because if you can get people super petrified about mortality, you can get them to do anything,
That is a statement that I have never thought personally, but holy shit, that's a powerful fucking concept because my God, that is just if you look at the system, God, that is just cruel to people, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as you were talking about jobs to do, I think another job to do that is also deeply related to optimal health is examining death and overcoming our sense of existential fear about it and having radical acceptance for it. Because once you overcome that fear, you actually overcome a lot of other fears. Because even the relational stuff and tribe is ultimately about survival from death. So, like, and I think, this has got me really interested, of course, in, you know, there are so many different schools of thought around mortality, from the Stoics to the Taoists to the mystics and Sufi thinkers. There's so many, and people have grappled with this. But going down those roads, learning about different conceptions of it, and then of course the psychedelic movement, which I think can and there's it's not like that's the only path to a different perspective on death, but in some way it accelerates people, I think, having this sense that they've never had in their whole life, that they're not actually just here for this brief moment, that they're part of a continual eternal flow and process that is very much like a different conception than what we've thought about of the binary life and death. And all of that is just go back and say, like, there's something about the chronic disease epidemic, which, if we have, as we talked about, is in very much rooted, I think, in hypervigilance and toxic fear and lack of relation and chronic loneliness. And then somewhere in there as well is our ultimate fear of mortality. And it's like, I don't actually believe we're going to fix some of these monumental health issues if we don't actually bring some of everything you're talking about and some of this also discussion around existential fears into the conversation. Because if you are scared, you are sick. And so, yeah, but it's so important. So I just, I mean, I just obviously.
I have to say that I'm like, as much as I've been one of the biggest proponents of psychedelics, because I have taken pretty big risks with my own experimentation with psychedelics, I'm very, very lucky. I have not had a truly bad trip before. Aside from one time at Burning Man, where this guy picked me up and shook me and screamed, "I love you," and it was like really scary. Um, Besides that happening once, and I mean, I was wearing a really hot outfit, so I kind of, in some ways, he was drunk, can't really totally blame him, but anybody should really pick you up and shake you. However, I have definitely experienced, what's called ego death multiple times now, and, um, I would not recommend people just go off and take 5-MeO DMT or NN-DMT or, like, a heroic dose of mushrooms in order to get over their fear of death. However, it has helped me personally. It's very dangerous, like, about 5 to 10% of people who do large doses of psychedelics actually have like, PTSD from and trauma, not necessarily PTSD, but they actually have a trauma from the experience being, like, they were unprepared for it. Part of why I'm building this company is I actually think we might be able to figure out how to screen people for these adverse, type of experiences and trips. I actually think that there's a way to establish an understanding of how to create a perfectly safe environment, safe mindset, and safe drug experience so that people can experience ego death. But right now we're in the infancy of this movement, and so a lot of people are doing it haphazardly underground with shamans and fake, therapists that actually aren't trained, and so they're going off trying to, like, conquer their fears of death. They're trying to, like, they're trying to, like, heal their trauma, and actually there's a lot of re-traumatization happening to people. So I just wanna, like, give a massive disclaimer that, like, even though psychedelics have helped me overcome my own personal fear of death, they most definitely have caused people to have even bigger fears of, all sorts of things. So it's really important to have that disclaimer. But that being said, there will be probably a time in our lifetime where we have I would say it's not gonna be overnight, but there's gonna be a time in our lifetime where you will probably be able to get medicine for helping you come to terms with your fear of death. And there are companies that are studying, end of life anxiety. Turns out that it's not a diagnosis because it's not considered a pathology, but it's almost it's like a pervasive. The problem is that so many people experience it, so it really can't be a disease if everybody has it, they say. Now, that being said, um, I do think that, like, psychedelics are not the answer for everybody, for sure. I've seen people on death's door with cancer, and psychedelics did not fix their fear of death, and in fact, they still died very much in fear. However, um, the key to being able to come to terms with death is to actually learn how to live in a way that enables you to actually, frankly, just like this book called this book called Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. And like if you can look at death as like this thing that's on the on that like your peripheral vision to your left, like always in your peripheral vision, if you can actually look at death like it's always there next to you, waiting for you become a kind of accustomed to the reality that like, oh yeah, I'm gonna die. Like, and death's right there. Like could happen like right there. And that book was something that I think really changed my perspective of death because I was like, "Oh, so I don't have to just, like, occasionally be terrified of death, but I can actually think about it pretty consistently enough that I'm like, oh, this is, like, part of my life." Now, my now problem from that is, like, because I'm not afraid of death anymore, I have this deep sense of impatience because I'm like, "Holy shit, I know exactly how much time I have left, and I have a deep sense I'm probably gonna die in my mid-90s, and sadly, that's just my reality. I'm, like, pretty, like, much know that I'm probably gonna go somewhere in my mid to late 90s, and so because of that, I'm like, "Okay, how many years do I have left, and what do I need to accomplish in this period of time?" And, like and I was talking to this guy, and he's like, "Wow, your biggest fear is that you're running out of time." And it's not that you're afraid of death. You're like, you're fine with dying. You're just like not fine with running out of time in this life. And it's like, that is something that I'm working on myself is like, I'm really trying to work with like, what is this internal impatience about? And what is it that I'm ready? Like, why do I feel like there's such a limited amount of time? And so one of the consequences of not fearing death is like, you just start getting this deep sense of agency that you know you're going to die. And so you have to spend your life as much as possible, not asleep. You wanna spend your life awake and, like, you wanna do and, like, as a result, I think it's funny because like, this guy was like, you have the desire to accomplish what 6 people would accomplish in typically their own individual lives, you know?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know." It's not necessarily healthy, I think, to have this sense of running out of time, but I do think that, it's just another area that I could focus on working on letting go, you know? It's another area that I can just work, "Okay, so, like, how do I let go of that urgency? How do I let go of that sense of running out of time? How do I mean, it's really hard if you're in the startup world because 'cause you're like, this is the culture of you're running out of time. You've got deadlines, you gotta move faster. Um, however, I do think that, like, if you can just let yourself kind of think about life in a more gentle way and like, okay, so like, okay, I'm gonna die. What if I actually realize that I'm gonna die tomorrow, like potentially tomorrow or in 10 years, how can I live my life differently? Like, what would I be doing differently? And so one of the things that really got me motivated around building a company around relationships and health, specifically the interactions of relationships with health, is I realized that healthy relationships could extend my life potentially 12 years and that social disconnection was a bigger driver of disease than smoking, drinking, sedentary behavior, or obesity. And I was like, "Oh, great. This is something I could sink my teeth into. This is something that could actually be useful to people." And yeah, like I think it's just the key to accepting your death is actually while you're alive, recognizing that you need to make priorities. You actually need to prioritize certain things like your relationships. You actually need to prioritize the things that are going to bring you real joy and you do need to wake up. I mean, I had a DMT trip many, many years ago, and I basically resigned from my job a month later because I was like, I can't work in this environment because I'm living for other people's desire for me to become a certain person. And that person that I'm becoming is not who I really want to be. And so you don't need drugs to come to that conclusion. You could just sit with yourself and ask yourself, if I were living my life any differently than I am right now, how would I be living it if I was living a life that would bring me true fulfillment, that would bring me real more joy and more meaning, frankly. And you got and these are personal questions you have to ask yourself,
Yeah.
you know?
I love that. I think just two things that you were saying while you were talking. I think one is this like having death right next to you as this friend that you're kind of, curious about, not this like thing that you just don't think about and that's like this scary amorphous thing. One thing I like loved in medical school, was learning about just and the concept that like we're dying every day and the idea of like final death. like we're constantly, like we are talking about earlier, recycling with the environment and hundreds of millions of cells dying every day. And we don't even, because we don't even really learn about biology very well, we don't even realize that. We don't even realize that like the body we are today the body we had 10 years ago has fully died. Like literally, I don't know for a fact that every atom and every cell is gone, but probably the majority of it is. And you know, we literally eat a metric ton of food per year. And where does that go? Well, it goes with waste and death of cells. And it's like one thing that's crazy is like that I think people don't even realize is that from the moment we're conceived, we're actually dying. Our hands in utero were paddles and with no fingers, and cell death is what caused our fingers. Our ear canals were plugs, and cell death leads to an ear canal. And like, so this is just part of life. We're part of this continual, it's just the end. What we're really scared of, I think, is end of consciousness, but we don't even really have any understanding of that anyways. And so the idea, something that's very comforting to me is meditating on the idea that death is absolutely part of everything I'm doing and living. And the second thing I just wanted to comment on, I just finished a great book called 4,000 Weeks, which was really good about, our short period of time here. If we're lucky, we have 4,000 weeks. And he was saying, you could have two different realities. You could be a type of person who travels to 50 different countries and who's constantly on the move and doing so much stuff. But if you are not present and you are not actually focused on what you're doing, then it's not like you actually had any of those experiences at all. And versus if you have a short life, but you are fully awake and experiencing it, who lived more life? And we all know that feeling of like having a full day, but you were distracted. There were emails, you were on your phone, you were stressed about something, you were anxious, you were thinking about a breakup, whatever, and you're not there. So like that gets to the main point here, which is that presence, being present and experiencing the life that you're living is like such an antidote to, I think, the anxiety, because we can let weeks go by without fully living. And so the waking up concept, I think, is that you sort of talked about, I think is kind of the crux of like a lot of this. And I think we all know that when we're truly present, the phone is down, we're actually connecting, even feeling someone else's energy, like those are the good days. Like those are the days that we did something with our body. We felt our body, all these things. So yeah, God, I would just love to talk about this with you like all day, but I want to end on a much lighter note than death, which is to talk a little bit about, honestly, to just pick your brain about skin, because we know that the body is one big thing. It's all connected, and skin is the largest organ in our body, and very much related to metabolic health. You have the most beautiful, radiant skin of literally anyone I've ever met in person. And so
Aw.
I know people will love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on like, how do we have the healthiest, most vibrant, radiant skin? What are the environmental factors that are like potentially hurting this? And
Funny you mentioned that because I went on this trip and I ate the food was covered in vegetable oil. And I unfortunately have like a very sensitive liver, I think, because if I eat just any like excess vegetable oil or sugar, I get breakouts on my back. And I started breaking out all over my back, and I was so embarrassed on this trip because I was like, "Holy crap, like, what is happening to me?" My face looked okay. I did get a nice sit last week on my head, but I don't normally break out that bad anymore because I figured out that a lot of it has to do with my digestion and my food and my insulin sensitivity. And so what happened is I went on this trip and I went from eating fairly low carb to eating dessert for like 2 to 3 meals, like literally having dessert at like lunch and dinner and like
it's a cruise ship and they just have it
Nutella. There
everywhere.
was like
Yeah.
Nutella on this really good gluten-free bread. There's this new kind of Nutella that was made by somebody on Stranger Things, TBH or something. It's delicious. It's got less sugar, but it's still, got like 12 grams of sugar per serving. And I'm eating all this sugar and there's all this vegetable oil in the vegetables. And I'm like, my skin is breaking out. And I was like, I'm just telling everyone that, like, you may see this today, but this was not me, like, a week ago when I had a zit on my face and I had a breakout on my back, and what happens when you eat the wrong fuel is specifically sugar in particular, is it causes insulin spikes, And not only that, but there's a fair amount of dairy on the ship, and I don't really eat a lot of dairy normally, and I hadn't been eating dairy. So I was eating dairy, which causes insulin, IGF-1 signaling, and then I was eating sugar, which was causing, actually, I believe sugar may lower adiponectin, which increases potentially growth signaling in cells. There's like a few different pathways that cause this, but basically, like insulin signaling is enhanced by sugar consumption. And it also contributes to like mTOR signaling and growth of cells. Like there's actually a lot of increased androgen production when you eat a lot of extra sugar if it causes insulin resistant. So there's like these two or three pathways, insulin, adiponectin, and mTOR signaling that can happen when you eat too much carbohydrate. And I was eating a lot more sugar than I normally eat. And as a result, my skin started to break out like I was a teenager again. And I was like, this sucks. I'm so embarrassed. And I like didn't want to go in the sauna because I was like, people are going to see my back broken out. And it was really embarrassing. But I think it's important for people to realize that, like, if I was wearing a blood sugar monitor, I could have totally seen all this food and what it was doing to me. And instead, I was like, just kind of doing, you got to have fun on vacation, but you got to understand there's going to be consequences, especially for a physical system that's pretty highly tuned. So normally, like, what basically fixed my skin after years of trouble was, lowering my insulin, and so eating a lower insulin output diet with less sugar, less refined starch, and less dairy was, like, a huge, huge shift in my skin health. Like, first and foremost, when you don't glycate your skin as much, also, you get less wrinkles and you have more autofluorescence. So your skin actually does cause what's this there's this thing called skin autofluorescence. And it's literally the amount of light that's coming out of your skin, right? And they use this as a measurement tool for diabetics. And I wanted to buy one of these measurement tools once, but it turns out they're very expensive. So I discovered that if you want to like cause less cooking of your skin, because basically your metabolism is slowly cooking you over time. If you want to cook your skin less, you got to eat less kindling, and carbs are kindling. Okay. So they burn really fast and then they glycate your cells and they cause all sorts of oxidative stress bursts, which cause stiffness in your arteries and age you faster. So this is one of the biggest things that I learned wearing a glucose monitor for like since 2014 was like, oh, if I eat lots of sugar, I am going to actually cause my skin to break out. I'm gonna have less light coming out of my skin. I'm gonna have more wrinkles. So that's aging right there for you. You're basically aging yourself by cooking yourself too fat, too hot. So that's one thing. Another thing that was happening on the ship that I don't normally do is I was eating all day long. I was eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner and large meals for each of them. And that just is a larger insulin output because you're just eating more food. So if you want to have better skin, you probably as an adult, as a physical adult, unless you are an athlete and you are burning like thousands and thousands of calories a day, you don't need, especially if you're sedentary, you don't need 3 big meals a day. You need probably one big meal and two small meals or one or two regular sized meals or like but you don't need to be eating as much as you're eating, okay? Most people are eating just too much fuel, and so their bodies are, like, always metabolizing, and my skin looks best when I don't eat large amounts of food. I just look healthier. My skin just glows more. Fitness is a big one for me. I look and feel more energetic when I do exercise, and today I rode my bike to the gym, did a 20-minute weightlifting workout, and rode my bike back, and that was about 6 miles of bike riding and 20 minutes of heavy lifting, and, it took me about an hour and a half, but I don't do that workout every day, but man, do I enjoy those workouts, and if I was riding with my mom, and so I'm visiting her right now, and if I was riding on my own, I would probably get that down to an hour because I can ride real fast, but if you're with people, sometimes it slows down. Key is that, like, tomorrow morning I have to get up and I have to be somewhere by 9:15, and it's gonna take me about an hour to get there. So I have to get up earlier to go on a run, and I have to just think about my day tomorrow, but exercise, like, when I started doing more cardio on top of weightlifting and doing both, like, there's all these people who are like, "Oh, you don't need to do any cardio if you're a weightlifter." Screw that. You'll look healthier if you get more oxygen into your skin. You just look better. You gotta oxygenate your skin. Oxygen is life. Um and then there's always micronutrients, okay? So very, 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 very important is you gotta get your micronutrients dialed and your phytonutrients. Micronutrients and phytonutrients. Minerals are important. Vitamins are important. Phytonutrients important. So you wanna get all your minerals and your micronutrients, but you also wanna get your phytonutrients. You wanna get all the colors. So I actually, became the spokesperson of this company called, Neurohacker. They have a product called Qualia Skin, and they literally hassled me for many, many months. They're like, "You have to be our spokesperson." And I was like, "Look, guys, I don't really need your supplement. And then I started traveling and I started taking the supplement because I was living in a hotel for a few months in Austin and I wasn't eating enough vegetables. And I was like, all right, I will give you guys a chance. I'll take your supplement for a month and we'll see what happens. So I took their supplement and it has a lot of red pigmented like fruits in it. And so it's got pomegranate, and it's got like amla fruit, and it's got all these carotenoid rich fruits. And I saw my skin was getting like a rosier glow. And I was like, okay, you guys, I know what you're doing here. You made a supplement that increases carotenoids, and carotenoids increase rosiness in your skin, and that's why I look so much younger. And so, I actually I had a few slides in one of my lectures on food for my course at Stanford on how carotenoids actually make you appear more attractive to the opposite sex. And there's actually research that like you give people more carotenoids, their skin glows more because they have a rosier glow. It's not rocket science. I don't necessarily think you have to take a supplement to have great skin. In fact, eating red fruits is a great option. But for me, I was traveling. I wasn't getting enough fruits and vegetables while I was living in a hotel. And so sometimes a supplement can actually be a nice surrogate. But it's definitely like, obviously it's like an adaptation to a lifestyle that I've chosen to be a nomad. Um, I still eat a lot of raspberries, and today I had acai and strawberries and raspberries, and and I also love the supplement Qualia Skin. Um, the reason why it's also really useful is there's a lot of minerals in it from koji. So minerals are really important for skin health too because they modulate hormone production and collagen. You need enough vitamin C for collagen, so that's important. So other important things about skin is exfoliation. You have to exfoliate your top layer of your skin, and I use mitts on my hands for my whole body, and I use, like, topical, like, I use, like, there's this company called Disco, they make a good, like, mechanical, exfoliator, but there's mechanical and chemical exfoliators. So, vitamin C and alpha hydroxy acids, beta hydroxy acids are gonna use, acids to remove the top layer of your skin, but then mechanical helps you actually move the actual, epidermis off. So, moisturization is really important and sunscreen is really important. So, I learned the hard way this summer by not wearing enough sunscreen on my body, and I actually aged my body's skin pretty significantly. Fortunately, I've reversed a lot of it through large amounts of vitamin C and lots of exfoliation and lots of moisturization. But the key is you want to have turnover. So turnover enables you to have this nice fresh layer of skin exposed. Um, and then I'd say that that's really, I mean, sunscreen, exfoliators, moisturizers, those are really the things that I focus on. I'm not really currently doing retinol right now. I should probably pick it up again, but I just haven't. So, those are really my biggest secrets, I'd say, is like, I don't use that many skin products. Although companies constantly send me skin products, I don't really use that many. I use sunscreen, moisturizer, eye cream, and exfoliator. That's typically what I use.
Oh, such good tips. I mean, I'm of the camp, having had dealt with some really bad skin issues, really bad jawline acne until like my mid 20s, that I think that the
Hormones.
food and the lifestyle stuff is probably, in my mind, personally, 90 to 95%
I
of the
would
battle
say so.
at like
Yeah.
what you're putting in the body, right?
Yeah.
And like that the skincare is maybe the 5% icing
Oh,
on the
for
cake.
sure.
I would take Botox out of that category because I
Yeah.
think that that does a lot, but I think that in terms of actual skin quality and like acne and things like that, like for me in my personal life, it's been 90-95% what's going in my body and
And don't
lifestyle.
underestimate the liver, by the way. So
The
do not
liver.
underestimate the liver and the gut because this is really important for travelers. I travel a lot and it causes a lot of gut dysfunction and I regularly have to deal with SIBO issues because I am traveling and I'm disrupting my circadian rhythms and my food. And like I'm ready to buy a house and just like settle down somewhere. I'm actually like finally at a point where it's been almost 3 years nomadic, 2.5 years, and I'm like, "This is not." This last year, well, actually, I was nomadic, but I was more stable in 2020. 2021, I was full on traveling, and I ended up getting SIBO, like, twice, and it's like, you have to understand the gut-skin relationship is not to be overlooked, and if you have a large liver burden, and if you have a weak like, my liver tends to be a little bit more sluggish than the average person, anytime I get on planes and I'm regularly exposed to jet fuel and I get on a improper diet and I've got a bigger toxic burden, I get more jawline. I'll break out on my back and it's like it's hormonal because you need to have a healthy gut to have healthy hormones. And most people don't understand that relationship between the gut, the liver, the hormones, and the skin. And that's really, I mean, that was really one of the biggest breakthroughs. But it's hard to do that if you're traveling a lot because you're getting exposed to chemicals, you're getting exposed to a lot of jet fuel. Because like people don't realize this every time you board a plane, you're breathing in all the fumes that are around that plane. Every time you're driving in cars in big cities, you're breathing in all these fumes. So your toxic burden does play a role as well in your skin health. And so a lot of people I see in cities have this pallor. I never will never forget going to Beijing. And Beijing, all these people will just look sick. And I was like, wow, this air quality is so disgusting that people cannot breathe. Like your skin can't breathe. So watch your skin in different environments and notice how it looks in certain environments versus others. Some people are just going to be better adapted to certain environments than others. And personally, I do best when I'm in nature.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's been removal of dairy, getting insulin and sugar down, and tons of fiber and phytonutrients. So exactly what you said. I mean, if I'm so sensitive to the dairy and sugar that in terms of acne that if I have a podcast or a media appearance coming up and I know I'm going to have to be publicly facing for at least 10 days beforehand, I will make sure that there is no dairy in anything that I eat and make sure that my blood sugar spikes are lower because it's 1 to 1 for me
Oh,
at
I
this
will get a
point.
zit.
Like
I will get
specific,
a zit.
yeah.
Any sugar, zits, you know?
It's so. Anyways, that's a message for you. There, it is definitely if you're dealing with skin issues, and it's certainly not just acne. It's of course also like inflammatory skin conditions. Getting some of this simple stuff dialed in: fiber, phytonutrients, low sugar, low insulin, and for some people who are sensitive, dairy, because dairy does drive, like you said, IGF-1 and insulin, both of which, I mean, this mechanism I just always think is so fascinating. Literally stimulate the cells of the sebaceous gland, the oil producing gland of the hair follicle, to make it bigger and produce more oil. So it's usually like but it's just crazy. So,
Turns out it's all
but
science at the end of the day. If you want good
it's all
skin,
science.
if you wanna get skin, you need to put a levels blood sugar monitor on. You need to start seeing these blood sugar spikes, because if you don't see them, you don't really accept that what you're eating is causing the problem. And it's like, I actually need to get more sensors because if I don't see these spikes, I start falling into, "Oh, I'll just have a little bit of that in my in my coffee." I'll just do a little bit of that dessert, and before you know it, you become addicted again. And it was amazing how 1 week on this boat, and I was, like, full on every meal, sugar, 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 and I broke it, but then I had to start taking all these herbal antibiotics and, like, and it's funny because I got a UTI for the first time ever, and I was like, "I'm pretty sure this might have been all the sugar I consumed, pretty sure,"
Yep.
you know?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I was just telling you before the episode, like I have this upper respiratory thing going on. I've muted myself like several times during this episode and been coughing, and it's like it's no surprise to me. I actually knew it was coming because last week I was in LA for a week. I was at a bunch of events and things like that, kind of eating the kitchen sink, and I'm like, I'm gonna get sick, you know. And so it's just, none of this is to say that, like, you know, some things just happen, but I think it's good to remember that a lot of this is in our control. And
And
agency.
I remember that, like, where we are now versus where we were when we were younger, like, I got sick all the time. I was a sickly child, right? I did not have good skin. I had all sorts of hormone dysfunction. Like, we are who we are today because we decided that we were going to change our lifestyle based on information and science, and that science works. Now, the challenge is being in an environment that is not actually like that you are different. You're gonna have to be different than most people. But the benefit of being different than most people is you have more radiance. And like this girl I'm friends with, this wonderful human, she emails me and she goes, "I just want you to know I had a dream about you and you were literally fluorescent." And I was like, "Wow, what a cool dream that like people think that I emit that much light that I'm a fluorescent human now."
Well,
That's
that's why I had to
awesome.
ask you about your skin. You do really glow, and I think that that is just a testament to everything you're doing and thinking about. And
Thanks.
you said in the episode that service is the secret to happiness, and I think that you coming on and spending 2 hours of your time talking publicly about stuff like this is such an incredible form of service. And you're sharing what you've thought about. You've had to spend thousands of hours of your life alone, thinking, ruminating, reflecting, writing, synthesizing, and sharing. That is such a service. And so I'm so grateful for this conversation.
Oh, thank
And
you.
okay, last thing, where can people find you?
Oh, find me at on Instagram at drmolly.co, at drmolly.co. You can also find me, at Dr. Mel www.drmelly.co. And then let's see here. I'm on Instagram. I already told I'm on LinkedIn, Molly Maloof MD, Twitter, Molly Maloof MD. And my website is Adamo Bioscience, Adamo Bioscience.com. So find me at all those different places. But Instagram is probably the best place. Instagram or Twitter.
Awesome.